Folks, welcome back. Episode 26 of Christ Over Fear. The November episode with none other than Colonel Retired Frank Burns, which I've already let him know. We came on, we did a comms check. I said it's going to be very difficult for me to call you Frank because my goodness, I was 17 years old when I first met. I believe it was Major Burns at that time. And that's just how I think of him. I think of him much like people think of coaches, mentors, teachers, but I will call him sir most often just because that's the level of respect even to this day. I'm 43 years old, but in my eyes, he still is given that title. But I'll try to do Frank as well, but we will see. So anyways, hey, November 2nd, 2022, we're live today, which I'm excited about, which is awesome, to be back because we're doing it the first Wednesday of every month, from here on out. So this Wednesday is, also interesting because we have the month of November. A lot of the month of November revolves around November 11th, Veterans Day coming up next Friday. And then also, Christ Over Fear, raw, transparent, real. That's what the three taglines of this show are. That's what we try to do on this show with our guests, with me, is being raw, transparent, real. I have to make a statement today about November 2nd, 2003, 19 years ago today. That's when a Chinook, a CH-47 helicopter, was shot down south of Fallujah, and my platoon was the quick reactionary force on the scene. And we lost 16 Americans, 16 soldiers that day, in that horrific day. And it's really, for myself and the 38 members of my infantry platoon, where I would say we had been in a firefight or two prior to that. We had just gotten in country in September, but that was really where it got real and where I think innocence was lost in a lot of individuals that day. So I bring it up because if there's any listeners out there who are directly related to the 16 individuals, the 16 soldiers we lost, or related to anyone or experienced that day firsthand, I want you to know that today is a day of reflection for me on those 16 individuals lost and the 26 wounded that we tried to help as well. And it's a day that still hurts. It's a day that still hurts. And I want people to know that regardless that, when we experience those types of events in combat or outside of combat that are rather tragic in our lives, that it's okay to experience those emotions and still feel them years later. It means we care. It means we're human. And it means it had an impact on our lives. So I just wanted to mention that because the unique situation of November 2nd, 2022 being a day that we're live on Christ Over Fear versus, what transpired 19 years ago on this exact date. And really how in the low of that, while I wasn't there yet and I wasn't close as I am today, that ultimately I know the Lord was calling to a lot of individuals, every individual, quite frankly. But there's still that why. And I guess that's where I got to be raw, transparent, real. There's still that why, even this morning, as I reflected on it, there's still that why that I ask. And I want you to know that I still ask that why of God, of the Lord. I know sometimes I'm not going to get that answer. I'm not going to get that answer until we get to heaven. I know there's a lot of individuals that were impacted by that day, direct family members that have to be asking or have asked prior the why. But as I reflected on that, I thought about, while we live in this here and now, here on earth, if we never experience evil, if we never experience darkness, then we can never really truly understand or grasp or feel his goodness. And so if we don't have that other horrific stuff that goes on that is bad, especially with a lot of people who have experienced stuff that have been guests on this show, if we don't go through the heartache, the pain, the turmoil, the agony, man, we don't get to experience his goodness, the joy he can bring in our life, the abundanceness. So while it hurts, while it's pain ridden at times, it also, on the flip, we can also experience the joy that only he can bring to us. So that is my soapbox for today. I'll get off of it now. But without further ado, I cannot wait to bring on Colonel Frank Burns to the screen, and let me bring him up now. There he is, sir. And I tell you what, you outdid me with your beard today.
It just started in November too, so no shave November.
Yeah, this is only day 2, right?
Right. So no, up front. So your story for his glory. So thank you for shooting your back, Azimuth, and prayers still go out to the 16 soldiers lost and 26 wounded. So you know how it affects different folks. So I would not have known that in just our short conversation before we got on. So thank you for that. And we're continue to pray for you and your men and their families. So thank you. And then thank you for having me on the show for Christ Over Fear and shooting the back, Azimuth, to see you. It's funny when you picture, you go, this is the 17, 18-year-old guy that I knew at the prep school a few years ago. And, to live vicariously through you and through all the folks who have gone through the prep school, or soldiers or lieutenants, whatever have I had, but it's a great feeling to see how well that you've done, your peers, your friends have done out there. So thank you again I get a lot more out of seeing you all, I think, than maybe you see me or remember me from back in the day. So thank you, Chad.
Well, it's definitely reciprocated. So I appreciate that as well. And I think the impact, that's why, to everybody out there, I had shared with Colonel Burns just the impact that he had on me when at 17 years of age at the prep school at United States Military Academy Preparatory School. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But then also I didn't give a good enough background on Colonel Burns. So he's a graduate of UMass Amherst. Is that the main campus? Is Amherst the main?
Yes, the minute.
Okay.
Dr. J's.
Am I allowed to disclose the year that you graduated?
You sure can.
1986.
Right.
We've got a seasoned warrior on our hands. And then he's also a Naval War College graduate. He's got his master's degree. And then, he's got his teaching master's degree as well that he got when he was at the prep school. He served all the way up until 2016 in the United States Army. Multiple combat deployments to Iraq, as well as maybe a few other locations. And then right now he's currently installation command in the San Antonio, Texas area, Fort Sam Houston. And the latest accolade is the author of the soon to be released book. I don't think it's officially out yet, Back Azimuths. And I think it's all about ships, which we'll talk about that and what that actually means. No, it's not a good reference to the Navy. So all you Navy folks out there, don't get too excited on that front. And then obviously our paths crossed in 1997 at West Point. I know you had been in for quite some time at that, but Colonel Burns, do you mind just sharing how you got from Amherst, from UMass into the U.S. Army, and kind of your background to get you into the military?
Sure. So thanks, Chad. Thank you for the introduction. So Massachusetts, Central Mass, number 8 out of 9 children, born to Tom and Elizabeth Burns. So had a lot of folks before me coming in really the journey from St. Leo, St. Bernard's to the Army. So I grew up with Veterans Day, but Memorial Day probably has more special meaning to me. So I grew up looking, Memorial Day we go to the cemetery. So I'd look on a tombstone and it had Francis B. Burns, Corporal USMC, BSM with Valor, 2 Purple Hearts. And date of birth, June 8th, his date of death was June 8th, 1951. So my date of birth was June 8th, 1964. So that desire to serve was kind of planted in me then. Growing up, different stories about how he came about it, but that's kind that's kind of the inkling. My dad had served. One of my older brothers had served in the Navy. My grandfather had served in the Army. So, but that seed was planted there. So that's kind of how I, Army ROTC at UMass, but I was also in the reserves and National Guard at the same time. So they helped pay my tuition. Commissioned early. I was commissioned at 19 years old, and then in the Guard for a couple of 2 years, came on active duty, and then Fort Benning, Georgia, all the different schools there, branched infantry, learn, the company grade, the lieutenant captain years, you're learning leadership firsthand in hands-on type leadership. And then just after that, I transitioned. That's when I came to the prep school as a older captain, I guess, 8 years in, and then stayed, get promoted to major there. And at the prep school, really just a great experience with the enlisted blood going to the academy. And I was able to experience what it's like to be a tactical officer, but then a coach at the same time. And so you learn about different ships there. Mentorship is kind of what came out there. And still, beside you, there's other folks I reach out to and have reached out to me. So Matt Work, he did it a couple years ago, and he was at Fort Hood. We wrote back and forth, and he said, "Hey, those gold cards that you made us do," he said, "those actually work." So it was funny to see it, and I still carry those around with me. And time in the Army after that, back to Benning with officers. So I had some officers I had at the prep school coming through, and then at the Pentagon, kind of the midway through my career. 11 September happened when I was there, and then I went back to Benning for one station unit training with soldiers, with Joe and the drill sergeant. And let's see, after that went to Iraq for the first time with 1st Cav, 06-08, and learned about partnerships there. And that was the whole, I was working on a military transition team, as one of your guests was before. And I think it was Alton McCallum. I think he mentioned that he was doing similar type work. So learned about trust, rapport, relationships there, and came back, did some time at the War College. And then let's see, then I went to Installation Management Command, Fort Polk, Louisiana. And so the stuff you did in Iraq with the partnerships, you kind of did that inside the gate and outside the gate at lovely Fort Polk, where I was when our first son was born way back when. And then I went back to Iraq as we were winding down there with the Office of Security Cooperation. So you get to see the national defense strategy, national military strategy coming together with not having a security agreement and all that entails. And then I came back and did installation management at the Pentagon, and then also at Fort Sam Houston, where I retired. And then after I retired, I had I just wanted to give back somehow, some way to the schooling that I had growing up. So I was selected for a principalship at Our Lady of Perpetual Help in Selma, where I have great memories, great friends. And for a couple 4 years there with the students, the parents, the teachers, the community, and still am a member of that community today. And then kind of transitioned now back to Installation Management Command. So, and that's where I am right now. So, and then a shout out, I know some other folks do, to Darlene. So just, she's my north, my south, my east, my west, to quote a little bit of my dedication in the book. But that's kind of what drew us together, was faith way back when. So she's probably more excited or excited as us to be on this show. So I just want.
Well, could you share a little bit about that? How'd you two meet, and what was the timeline? And
so way back in Germany, 1987, when we had a wall up. We had a East and West and Federal Republic of Germany. So we were lieutenants together, different. She was quartermaster, I was infantry, but we kind of we shared, that faith. We knew that there was she was raised Baptist. I was raised Catholic and still am Catholic, but we shared the belief. She probably understands it. And I know she does understand and has read the Gospels and the Bible more than I have. I have parts of it that mean things to me, but then we've shared it, and that's kind of what drew us to each other. I knew that we would have each other eventually, but we always had God way up there. We knew that was a commonality for us, and there were things we shared and things that we believed and still do to this day, and that helped us with our family and helped us get through that litany of things that I described with how I came in the Army. So.
Well, absolutely. And I'm assuming you at a young age, 8 of 9 in the family, you all were kind of Sunday mass and going to church quite regularly on Sunday then? Is that your upbringing?
Yes. Yeah. So it was, because you had to divide up. So my mom had some of us at 6:30 on Saturday, and then some of us 6:30 p.m. and then some of us at 7:30 with our father in the car. I remember that fondly, and the paper routes and things like that. But yeah, we had that growing up in the sacraments. We also had the schooling too. So fortunate enough to be in Catholic schools for 12 years. And I guess that kind of drew me after I closed out my military career to give back that way. There's just so many folks. I mean, you talk about mentors and the teachers and the coaches and everyone who did that to me. And I just wanted to, in turn, return it, to pay it forward, as it were. Mm-hmm. So there's so many folks. I know you have mentioned before with you still call somebody coach. So I still do the same when I go back, or still call them sir, or whatever it might be. So mm-hmm. And they really looked out for you, as well as the 7 above me and 1 below me who looked out for each other there in our neighborhood growing up. Just a different time in the neighborhood with the bikes, and just call each other up. What are you having for dinner? Let me go to your house. Oh, you're having spaghetti or whatever it might be. Fridays was always fish of some sort. It was funny. So I remember playing CYO basketball, and Friday night everyone would just come in just smelling the fish and be like, oh, you had cod or you had snow. So it was trying to guard each other with the fish smell on. It was pretty funny. But I'll pause there.
Oh no, that's great. Now, now a Catholic and a Baptist together, that had to be an interesting dynamic. And I guess because we're the Christ over fear show and everything else, I guess, can you allude to how that had to be I'm assuming it was the center. You kind of alluded to it, I guess, as well, about that being the center of your foundation, but how you both had to lean upon faith, especially you have 3 boys, I believe, yes. three young men at this point in time, but just 30 years in the Army, deploying, multiple times and all of that, and the family dynamic. I can only imagine the challenges that you faced as the head of house and as a husband and father. Can you just kind of share with us what you two did, you and Darlene, to make that a focal point, and how you relied upon him during those times?
Yeah, so thanks for that. So what we tried to do whenever we he had a permanent change of station somewhere, we tried to find a church first of all. So it didn't matter where we lived. We tried to build it around the church, and then from there, our commute or wherever it might be it at Fort Benning or be it in the DC area. So we always had that to come back to. So no matter where we were, we knew that it would be similar for the children to have this, as close as they can to a Christian upbringing during school. I think one of our oldest went to a public school for 1 year, and that was it in high school. But other than that, it's Christian or it was Catholic school. So that foundation was always there from during the times of deployment, and then right up to where we ended up here in Texas. In Northeast Texas, and how we ended up here was funny. It was one of my brothers who was at then Southwest Texas State, now Texas State, a colleague who founded a school, one of the plank holders of the school up here in the northeast side of San Antonio, Bob Gorman. My brother Tim linked us up, and we knew what kind of school do you want? What are you looking for? And he said, this is the place to be. You need to live here, and this is the community where you need to live in. You have the same beliefs, same value system. So we tried to have that. That was a faith. No matter where we live, we tried to find that first and foremost, and everything else kind of fell into place after that.
Man, I like that. That's a great way of, especially in the military, those who are out there beginning their journey as young officers or enlisted, but as young families in the military, to make that your foundation. I had not thought of that before, but making that where, okay, we're going to live, close to that location, and we'll sacrifice on our commutes or whatever, but we want to make sure we're planted where our kids have a solid foundation. That's pretty awesome. I want to go to Lacrosse, and you being, I know it's a little bit of a asthma shift. All right. We're dead reckoning back to lacrosse now. You at the prep school. Now, were you a lacrosse? I can't remember. Were you a lacrosse you had to be a lacrosse player growing up.
I did not. So I had not picked up a stick before I got there. So my first 2 years at the prep, I coached football. They gave me the running backs, and they gave me the receivers first of all.
Yeah, the triple option.
You basically teach them how to block. Then I had running back, but then I transitioned with Coach Hansen. We can delve into more with the H factor, as it were. So I did lacrosse for 2 years. We had fall lacrosse, and then we had the season in the spring. So I think the nickname was lacrosse country in the fall because we ran a lot.
Yeah.
So that was just a way of weeding some folks out who may not want to play lacrosse. So I remember the time in lacrosse in the fall, and then somebody mentioned music too. I think on one of your podcasts, where I remember the weight room at the prep school, and couldn't agree on what music to play. So I had an ABBA CD, and we just played ABBA every time we lifted weights at the lacrosse. That was a lot. So I'd never picked up a stick before. So again, it was all right. One hand, throw the ball this way, throw the ball, catch the ball this way. The alumni games we played was a lot of fun. So we brought in folks from West Point, folks from the prep school who had played before. Then we played against y'all. I think I have the most penalty minutes for an alumni game, or probably however many I played. I remember they called me for something I did to you too. I don't know what it was, but I remember being put in the sin bin for a while. After
as a coach, you were? Or?
No, so we had an alumni game. I don't know if you remember, we had an alumni game.
Right.
So I remember. So I led in penalties, but I remember having to suit up because we didn't have enough players, and folks so didn't understand the offside rule quite as much as I should have. And I remember coming across and, Coach Burns, you can't do that. You can't come across like that across the midfield line when you're on defense. So, but yeah, that was a great experience. And again, you get to see, okay, this is whatever Captain or Major Burns, but now this is Coach Burns, and I was probably more of a listen up coach at that time. All right, listen up. The buses are going to be here this time. Make sure you get chow here. This is where we're going to be. But it was a great experience with lacrosse, and just another way to connect with the students. So I enjoyed my time there on the lacrosse field.
No, and then that's how I remember. I mean, I remember you through that lens, I guess, through that hat that you wore during our time there, and just it's funny now looking back on it. I mean, how much coaches have an impact on individuals. I've said that in other podcasts. I've said, oftentimes what happened up at Mikey Stadium and the football complex for the 4 years at West Point, that prepared me just as much, if not more, and with the coaches and the game planning and all that, as any class that I took at West Point. And just the competitiveness of it. And like you saying, hey, you don't care. You just grab the stick and throw it one-handed and go. There's something about getting individual. It goes back to MacArthur's, MacArthur and the emphasis he put on upon the fields of friendly strife, or sown the seeds that upon other days on other fair fields will bear the fruits of victory. So I could imagine as a military leader, and at that time, somewhat as still a younger leader in the military, captain, major, but just seeing that dynamic of that's really what, the impact can be as a military leader is almost being that coach, mentor, if you will, to whoever you're leading.
Yes. And then there, especially, so we had, we're looking at, Chad Jenkins, 17, 18 years old. So I'm looking at you for the next 10 years. So you have a year at the prep school, you have 4 at the academy, and you have 5 after that. So how much we can't really jam it down your throat. We have to give you enough to whet your appetite for certain things and plant the seeds that, in another way will bear the fruits of victory later on. So there was something you learn about yourself, because I can't say the same thing to you as a TAC officer as I can as a coach, as I can as another. And same with each individual. You have the same message, but you have to say it in a different way.
No, that's a good point. I mean, that's just reading. That's probably goes into one of your ships, mentorship, if you will, in your book. But I was actually going to ask you this. I prepped a couple questions and just reading everything, and especially like your latest, installation command in charge of 4,000 and all of that, which those numbers don't lie. That is true. But my question for you is, as a leader of multiple individuals throughout a lifetime of adulthood, what do you think, like, what's the number that you think you can impact, like when you try to pour into individuals as a leader? I mean, you're obviously not touching all 4,000 at the same time. Like what would you say is and not just you, but as a leader, I guess, as a generality, those who are young leaders out there, how many individuals they can impact at a given moment when they're in that position of leadership?
Yes. So thanks for that. So it depends on where you are. So I think the Army's got it about right with, the tactical, and they come from the Latin meaning to touch. So you're touching individuals. So you're at that tactical level, you can do that, you can do up to 40, and you'll know Joe and Josephine's name and their hometown and where they are, because you're up close with them every day, leading from the front. And then probably less so as a company commander or as a major, you start to be removed from that. And then you have your own circle of trust, as it were, the Byrne circle of trust. So you may have 5 to 7 folks out there that you have their trust, they have your trust, and you can kind of go back and forth with them. So I'd say 5 to 7 in your group, and then that pretty much stays as you make your way through the ranks. So, but now with Zoom or MS Teams or with the forum we're on now, you're able to say things and come across in a different way than you would be if you were so far removed. So that 5 to 7, you may try to have that tactical, you may have that touch point with however many you can get on an MS Teams call, up to 500 folks on an MS Team call. You can reach the audience that way, or a TED Talk, you can reach that audience that way if you're speaking directly to them. But the example, and then kind of, like I said, that group, that 5 to 7 circle is kind of who, and you probably saw that, and maybe with a fire team is probably really tight, and they always say, "Oh, squad, the squad doesn't get it," or if you're in the squad, "Oh, the platoon doesn't get it," or your platoon, the company commander never understands that. But you get that tight 5 to 7 folks, I think is a good number that you can make your way through and really influence and have an impact.
Well, I completely agree, and I like all your points on that. And I also think it's cool, just because we can use real world situations. Thinking about when I was a platoon leader, I'm thinking about right now, like my first Ranger platoon, 2 Bravo, 2nd Ranger Battalion. You got to give a shout out, Dirty Brigade. But okay, so I'm platoon leader, platoon sergeant, 4 squad leaders. That's 5 individuals right there, right? And then we have our greater platoon, or then I go up to company commander. It's the 3 platoon leaders, and then XO. There's 4. Individuals that really the company commander's pouring into, plus the first sergeant, and that's that 5 to 7 number. And I just think it's cool when you look at the Bible, when you look at Christ, when you look at the gospel. He had his 12 disciples, but then he had his main 3, right? His main 3 that he had, and then his 12 that he impacted. But then they'd go out and they'd feed 5,000. So it's just cool that the Army has replicated, really, and I doubt they'll ever point the light to that, but I mean, they're really mimicking how Christ and what his leadership was of the tactical, the touch point of the 3 and the 12. And really outside of that, while technology can use, Zoom can be used, all that, but I like your point of the touch point where you really know those individuals, where you can really pour in, where they're actually truly your tribe. It's oftentimes smaller than it is larger, in my opinion. Just wanted to get your take.
That's great. So yeah, he had his Peter, his John, that he really kept tight, and they kept him on his toes as well, with asking certain things, and he was pretty direct with them. And I think as a leader, you can be direct as Christ was with his close folks, and he expects that feedback or those questions. No stupid question asked. But Christ probably like, man, what are you really gonna do? I know what you're gonna do. You're gonna deny me 3 times. But
right.
All right, let's go through it. Let's so I'm getting tingly now just thinking about that. That's a great point that you made. And yeah, so he did. So it's interesting to see that. Thanks for pointing that out, Chad. I did not think of it that way either. That's great.
Well, I mean, it's my pastor down in Florida. He's the one who really brought it to fruition. And they had done some study or whatever, and it was that an individual can, I think, touch point. The average individual will touch between 8 to 12 people in their lifetime. And I was surprised by that number. I thought it would be like, oh, no, it's going to be larger. I mean, now and that's an average, I don't know, the study or whatever. But when you really stop and reflect on that, how true is that? I mean, and really, like, we think of our household. You have 3 men. I have my daughter and my son and my wife. Like, that's my fire team, right? Those are my 3. That's my fire team right there. And they're priority number 1. And then, they'll go on, they'll hopefully one day have children, which, hopefully will be a blessing from the Lord that they do that. And then they'll have theirs that they touch, and just that kind of, trickle down effect, which I think is pretty cool. When we stop at but I love that the military kind of has that same foundation on, whether you're a brigade commander, you still have your 3 battalion commanders who are reporting to you. It doesn't really leave, no matter like the trickle down. Yeah. And then they have their company commanders and they have their platoon leaders, but it's always that, it doesn't seem like it's more than that too often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then even the term, from the prep school or at West Point, tactical officer. So that tactile, that knowing that person, whoever he or she may be, they know what to touch and how to. That's really the direct type leader. But yeah, they always, let me get my squad leader, my platoon, whoever it might be, those 3 to 5 folks that I do trust, that I can have my message to.
Yep. Now I want to shift gears a little bit, because I read in your profile, and I think even in the not the foreword, but the introduction of your book, Back Azimuths, you being at the Pentagon on 9/11, what was that experience? And I know you've talked about tying in 9/11 and then the kind of the after action of where we shifted gears in the military and what that looks like. But can you just, from a personal standpoint, kind of describe to us that experience?
Sure, glad to. So I'll use some couple 3G words. So first, there's grief for the innocent lives lost and the families affected. Same as what you talked about at the very beginning for 2 November date meeting to you. You have that grief, and then I still have an extreme sense of guilt of of walking away without a scratch. So the position I was supposed to be in was it was an executive officer to a senior executive service, a 3-star equivalent. So I was supposed to be her executive officer, and then things changed after Benny. I get up there and I was put in a different position. So her office, she was not there at the time. She was forming something called Installation Management Command, where I am now. But her executive officer was old school. He's a senator in Texas, out of Waco, Brian Birdwell. So he was out getting a Coke because he didn't drink coffee at the time. So he was walking down the hallway of the Pentagon when it hit. So there were two, Cheryl Hincock and Sandra Taylor, in that office. They immediately, they were engulfed in flames. And then Brian, walking down the hallway, was engulfed in flames. And the only thing that saved him is he was old school, so he wore leather shoes. He didn't wear the core frame, the ready shine shoes. And when they picked him up, flesh falling off, that was the only place that they could put an IV was in the soles of his feet to get him in there. And I remember visiting him in the hospital and seeing him at that time. So that guilt was there, and you're just seeing the lives that affected. So I mean, he survived. He's like I said, he's a senator now, retired from the Army. So there's the guilt for that. And then guilt for walking away. What did I do? We literally this is our fire drill, because we just gone through the fire drill. This is where we go. This is where we meet. Okay, we have our phone numbers. We'll be in contact. And we didn't. Cell phones back then were not the cell phones we have today. So there was nothing going on with cell phones. There was no text. You couldn't get text. You couldn't call anybody. The phone. One of my buddies, he said he tried calling me, but I had called him right after the planes had hit in New York, and he said, "Stand by, we're tracking more," and that was it. And then I didn't hear from him. He didn't hear from me, but he's doing well now. So you remember, the phone calls from Chip Chase. So that guilt, and then I should have gone in triage. I should have done this. I should have gone back and done certain things. And I did not. So you have a guilt feeling for that. And then grace is a third one, or you can call it gratitude at the same time. And that I did, and that I'm here today, trying to share a story. But there is grace, and you have God's grace. That was not the time for me. He knows when the time is, or what the time is not to be. And so there is the grace. So the grief, guilt, and grace kind of encapsulates that. I know I gave a talk on that. It's mentioned a little bit in my book. One of my grandnephews, he called me up before September 11th this year, and he said, "Hey, Uncle Fran," he said, "Can you tell me, what it was like then?" So I shared a little bit of that. So, but it's always in the way I write about it. And the way that I talk it, it's always in like a imperfect tense. So it's still ongoing. So it's an ing word. So you're always thinking through what it is and the folks that it affected. So, yeah, that's about it on that. I don't know if you want to delve any more, but yeah, the grace, is kind of where I am now, and then the gratitude. So.
Well, I guess my first thing is thank you for sharing that. I mean, my goodness, to be right at the epicenter of one of the locations, is a perspective that only a few have, really, in the grand totality of the entire United States. So I appreciate you sharing that. And then if you don't mind, though, the one follow-up I'd have on that is with grief. Grief obviously is one I mean, like I shared this morning, I still experience grief from that day on November 2nd. There's still grief, and grief is, I guess, from my experience, not something that will probably ever go away. Does the emotion of grief maybe subside? Is it as strong as when it was a little bit closer on a timeline? Yes, it has subsided for me a bit. I mean, but it still will come. But I guess my question is on the guilt. What have you done, or have you done anything to help you with the guilt?
So so thanks for that. So just really for just sharing the story and just talking through the emotions
Mm-hmm.
really helps me in just sharing the story. So if we experience something like that, I think we're bound to share that and to express and to self-reflect, self-expression. It helps in our relationships. It helps in our decision making. So it's that whole emotional intelligence is part of it. So just really just talking through it
Mm-hmm.
has helped. And just every time we do it, it's like, did I just pick the scab again on something, or is that wound healed enough that I can continue to, I didn't pick out the stitches or anything of it, but there's still enough there that the scars, they tell stories.
Mm-hmm.
They tell better stories than tattoos, but that's what I think.
No, I love that, and I think you're right. It's the ability to express it and to communicate it. Because, and I hope I didn't cause a scab to come off. But the reason I asked is just because I know there's others out there who could benefit from hearing that, and how you navigate the guilt of that day. And it brings me back to November 2nd, the guilt that I had, the immense guilt that I had as QRF, as the platoon leader. And it was with a specific incident during a triage of a sergeant. And while triaging him, he was pinned under the wreckage, and I went with my RTO and my FO to go get more and more of my soldiers to try to lift the wreckage off. And I left a team leader with him. And he asked me not to leave him. And I just said, "Hey, I'm going to be right back." And he's like, "No, don't leave me." I was like, "I'm going to be right back." Cause I had, been talking to him to keep him from going into shock. And I was probably gone for 30 seconds to a minute, maybe a minute and a half total, when I finally got a couple others to come help, and he had expired. He had passed. And the guilt I felt for years, I mean, all the way up until 2017, when I finally went and discussed it with a professional, with a psychologist, and the immense guilt felt by that, because I bottled it up. To your point, I didn't express, I never talked about it. I never would even go there to discuss it, because it was so painful. I think deep down, not consciously, but subconsciously, it was such a scar, and such a point of embarrassment and shame and everything else, that I wouldn't touch it. But once I went through cognitive processing therapy, talk therapy, and I had to sit on it, it was probably the most awful experience, was writing that all out and then having to read it, all of those emotions. But it was able to pull those out, and some of the guilt that was associated with that, because I associated that I was a liar. I completely lied to him. He asked me not to go. I said I'd be right back. And then when I came back, he was gone. And it wasn't until going through it with a professional, she's like, "Well, Chad, you didn't lie to him. You actually went and tried to go get other guys to help." And the way our minds can be, and how we can get stuck in some of those negative thoughts, especially associated with ourselves, it can be very detrimental to our well-being and to our overall essence. We can act like we're good on the surface, but deep down, it can still have a lasting impact. So I share that with basically the greater audience, and for the dialogue that you and I have had, sir, that we can talk about that. And I think you being able to express what you went through on 9/11 and have that has an impact on others, and probably for yourself, on the healing process as well.
Mm-hmm. So and then, yes, there's other experiences. And so as a platoon leader, as a company commander, that I'm sure you've had, and you've shared some on some other episodes. Now I'm going back to, okay, that, you and, Alton and the other folks that you've had on, you were in direct, 24/7, that stuff was ongoing. And then even my experience in Iraq was different. So I was older at the time, so not quite a gray beard, so a little further removed from that. So that's why I said in the beginning, to see you go through it and share your experience and how Christ brought you through that eventually, it's powerful to share. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's the whole point of this show is there's a lot of individuals, Colonel Burns, there's a lot of individuals that that I know, that we might not know, but we know, indirectly, that are going through it. And that's, I think, probably a lot of the impetus of your book, which we'll go to back as myths, is pointing individuals to who the ultimate healer is, who the ultimate warrior is, who the ultimate physician is. And that's to Christ. And it wasn't until I wish I could say I was, thin-headed, but I'm thick-headed. And it took a lot of agony and pain and everything else and being brought pretty much literally to my knees to recognize that it wasn't about what I could control or couldn't control, but it was about him and what he could do when I gave him all of me. And so I think you sharing, me sharing, that's what this is all about. It's not for the individual of us, but more for being able to have his story be told through us so that another person can hear it and maybe start that journey with him. And that's ultimately what it's about. So I appreciate you saying that, but can we turn to back Asmus, your motivation behind that? I mean, I've read the first couple chapter. I don't even know if that's considered chapters, but the first couple ships, if you will. And I've just been truly enthralled. And to be quite honest, I was looking for a new daily devotional because I get lazy. And so I did last year's devotional and then I just spin it and do it again because it's one a day. And I'm like, my goodness, this thing could almost be used as a devotional because I love the questions you ask at the end. I love the scripture and then the definition scripture and then the personal reflection or story. Like, how did you come about on that? How long did it take? Can you just give us a kind of a deep dive on that?
Sure. Thanks, Ed. So it took about, 30 years or so to write it. So,
yeah, right.
As a lieutenant, you have the green notebook, and in the back you scribble stuff, or you put a quote here, or this is, and you may put an expletive in there. So it took a while. I'm sorry, I moved my camera. It took a while to go through that. And then you have you have tons of green notebooks, tons of quotes. I really enjoyed languages and the meaning behind words. Not quite the SAT taking it 9 times or things like that. So just understanding what the word means, like tactical, but understanding the word, a Oxford Classical Dictionary definition, and then from that you find a Bible verse. And there's, I only chose one. And as you said, there's questions at the end of each chapter that, maybe it could be yours, or this could be used for a Devo, a daily Devo, or it could be used for a seminar or something. We're talking about mentorship. We're talking about relationships. We're talking about whatever the ships are. So, and just the word ship. So skipe means to shape, or it means character. So it's the shape of whatever it might be. Shape of the mentor, and we talk about who is the first mentor. We can kind of go through that. So I use a couple 3 words there. So after we define it, we use a Bible verse. First I used insight. So you provide some insight into the Bible verse, and then to you, the reader, or to me, the writer, what did that inspire in me when I read that Bible verse, when I read that word? What's the inspiration behind that, or a little bit of the Bible story behind that. And then with those two, and understanding it, you hope to ignite something. You hope to it's a call to action for whatever it might be, for the fellowship, for the craftsmanship, for the workmanship, for the, whatever it might be. And there's, fellowship. Hey, that's Thanksgiving. So I remember, with the Thanksgiving growing up with 9 of us in the household, and or remember the Thanksgivings in theater where, the chow halls are all done up with plenty of food to eat, or you go into a fob and they have wild turkeys they're cooking out there, out in Fallujah somewhere. So you remember the fellowship, and what did that mean to you? So I use those 3 words for it, and then I just think there's a Christian aspect that people do not want to go out on a limb and talk about. So, and I believe we're missing that. That's why I, excited to be here and just talk about that on your show. But depending on the audience, if there are folks who may not want that Bible verse, you can still use another verse or some type of quote or something that has meaning to you. Mm-hmm. So there's verses that are out there. So I remember, the inside of my clatter ring, a friendship ring I got from Darlene when we were engaged, she had, JN 1513 in there. So no greater love hath a man than this, to lay down his life for his friend. So, all right, well, that's going to be in the book. But, you said how long did it take? Well, that's, that's over 30 years ago. Or the Good Samaritan parable. That's akin to what I thought my first tour in Iraq when I was working with the Iraqis. So who's my enemy? Who is my friend? What if my enemy becomes my friend? How do I work together with him? Mm-hmm. What's that like? What was that like for the Samaritan parable? Or there's a story about a preacher at West Point who talked about the Good Samaritan parable and said, well, if someone was stationed upon the road that day, none of this would have happened. Well, not really. You really got to dig into it a little bit more. Would that guy would have taken action? What were the rules of engagement? Or would he just, continue that he couldn't do anything? So
it was good. I just actually read that. Or it was even the question further asked, wasn't that the Naval War College? Was that where you dove into that? Or?
Yes. Yeah. So that was, it was part of it there too. So I spoke about it there, and that was one of the electives I took there, and that it was with, it was a stock, Admiral Stockdale,
mm-hmm.
for the POW 7.5 years in Vietnam, awarded the Medal of Honor after he was shot down. So I took a course, and it was really an intro to ethics course. So it was some of the things that I had tried to understand as a freshman in college. So I'm rereading them again 20 years later at a different level, mm-hmm. based upon, the experience that I had in the military and kind of some of the education I had. So you have these, and, you write them down. You say, man, it's gonna mean something someday. So I still write them down, and now I have them on PowerPoint slide. Yeah. But when I started to do it, I had put, this little, John 15:13, Luke 4:24, 1 Samuel with David and Goliath. And I said, man, that's about marksmanship. There's something in there about marksmanship, and we teach marksmanship. So let me go talk about marksmanship. But it's about David and Goliath, with the practice that he had with killing the animals, and he knew exactly how to sling that stone. Mm-hmm. And then you got the 5 again, so that number 5 with the 5 stones that he picked up in the stream. So I get excited talking about it. So you have your own what ignites you after you read that, or mm-hmm. It may not be the exact same Bible verse that I have in the book. And then maybe that's something, like I said, we could, a seminar or just something, it's a fellowship of Christian athletes, or it's the word of the month, or there's so many weeks in a season, and, you go through all 21 ships in the season,
mm-hmm.
Talk about it. So that's kind of how long it took, or kind of my thoughts behind that book, but I'll pause there.
Oh, it's great. And I just love the almost the after action, the call to action, I guess, if you will, and I don't know if that's in after every ship or not.
Yes. Yeah. So after every ship, I kind of give my own personal how is it ignited to me, or then I ask the reader to kind of do the same.
Mm-hmm.
I do that for each question is a little bit different. So I have, 3 questions at the end of each, where they can ask themselves, okay, what, and I can, so there's a lot of them to remember. So I can't remember all of them. I got kind of a copy here, but you just kind of ask, it's really a self-reflecting. So you go back to your own emotion, my self-perception, my self-awareness, what's my interpersonal skills with folks, what decisions have I made? So that type of emotion is what I hope to draw the reader out from that. And it is at the end of each chapter, and you can skip around. You don't have to go from 1 through 21. It's, hey, I want to talk about workmanship, and then and you say fortunate or misfortunate. So I use some eulogies in there that I have given, and for my parents and 2 of my brothers who I lost, and then for my father-in-law. So we talk about, love is patient, love is kind. So I use that. I had heard that before, and I use that for my father-in-law when I spoke about him. But then you can also use it if you're speaking to the living. So one of the better birthdays we had for my mom was her 80th, and we all went to, she after church, after mass, we went to a flower garden. Then one of my brothers spoke about the Eucharist, and he's talking about fellowship at the time. So that was powerful. But to hear it before you're on the other side, you can say, okay, Chad is patient, Chad is kind, and you can kind of go through that. And when you have somebody say that to you, it has a whole different meaning than just.
Oh, believe me, sir, when I put my name in there, I got a lot of work to do. A lot of shall not lie. It's like, whoa, I got some work, because patient, kind, no, gentle, the fruits of the spirit, right? Like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. I'm like, whoo, all right, here we go, Chad, dial it back. No, but I thought that was awesome. I had never seen that. I mean, obviously 1 Corinthians, I think it's 13, right?
Yes.
And so love is patient, love is kind, and that, but I've never seen a person's name put in for love on all of those. And I love that. And obviously you had a very close relationship with your father-in-law. I thought that eulogy that you did for him was phenomenal. So it was quite a testament to him as a man and as the head of his house, but then how much, and I thought it was cool how, he encapsulated you as part of his family. It was like you were truly one of his sons.
And I think, you can see him way up top there. So really just flags of valor for different. So, my father's, my brothers, my father-in-law's, things that I've got for my retirement. So there's flags up there that represent that each of them in their service. So yeah, it was special because we had the connection. Hey, you were in Korea. Yeah, my father's brother was, and that's my namesake. And so we had that connection. So whenever he visited an Army post, it's, hey, let's go on the airfield. I want to talk to the crew chiefs. So,
oh, that's cool. Well, before we go, because we're coming up on the hour, I did want to get, when does the book come out? How do individuals obtain a copy of the book? How do they purchase it?
Thanks, Chad. So the end of month November, it'll be out on, I'll give you, it's www.deeds, Delta Echo Echo Delta Sierra.com, deeds.com.
Okay.
So it'll be out on that website. And there's a whole other story with him, the editor, and a platoon leader in Vietnam, and the same triple deuce infantry that I was at Fort Drum. So right now it'll be deeds.com, the end of the month of November. And then I'll eventually have the link to LinkedIn account where folks can request it there, and I'll have a process with PayPal or whatever it might be to get the books sent to you. So if they would want it. So ideally end of month November is when we'll get it out, and just getting the endorsements now, kind of the last touches on the book. It's been edited, as you know, right. So I'm sure there'll be other mistakes in there, but yeah, it just it took a while to write, but I always had it as something you want to share your story somehow, some way. So again, your story for his glory, as you started the beginning of this episode with.
No, well, it's awesome. And I tell you what, just through the few chapters that I've gotten to read and go through, I've actually enjoyed it very much. And like I said, I think I'm going to use it as my devotional, because I love the action of jotting some stuff after the reflection period. I mean, I have my journal that I typically do in the morning after reading the scripture and everything else, but I'd love to do that. So for anyone out there, I will tag that. If you can tag me in a LinkedIn post once it's up and active, I'll share that as well. So our listeners, our audience, and it's, deeds.com is the website, but we'll go ahead and put that out there. I'll put it out on LinkedIn as well, because I think it could help a lot of individuals who are wanting to use it from whatever. I think FCA, that's another, my son, his middle school has FCA. So that's another great aspect of using some of those ships to go through on a weekly basis would be awesome.
Yeah. So I know Alden is a facilitator up there in Belton. Scott Fisher, the head of FCA. So I'll reach out to him as well to hopefully get it through his platform.
Yeah. Well, sir, I tell you what, I can't thank you enough for coming on here. It's great to catch up after, my goodness, over 20 years of seeing you, but I knew it would be this way, where I could just see you, you could see me, and we'd be able to have that dialogue. So I appreciate you being raw, transparent, real today, and sharing your story of what he has done in your life. And then also this book, Back Azimuths, and getting it out to the masses so that they can get touched by him as well. So thanks for coming on.
Again, I appreciate it. And thanks for all you do, continue to do, and the best to Emily and the kids. Great to see you, Chad.
You as well. All right. We'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you.
All right, folks. Hey, that is episode 26 today of Christ Over Fear with Colonel Retired Francis B. Burns, a man who had a significant impact on my life at a young age at West Point's prep school, and then throughout his service in the United States Army all the way to 2016. And he's still, as a civilian, doing great things to service of his country to the San Antonio, Texas area. So as we always end this, I hope you guys had a takeaway that you can take, a nugget or two. I ask you if you could share it with those who one man's trash is another man's treasure. So if it didn't apply to you, or if it did, but you think it could apply to somebody else, or they might need to hear it. We had some good segments, especially at the 9/11 mark, and then the November 2nd mark, of maybe where there's some areas in people's lives that they're hurting. They're feeling the guilt. They're feeling the shame. If they can be able to go to a place where they can talk to that, especially with a professional, I'd highly encourage it. And that's what this is about, and inviting Christ into that pain and that agony, because I can tell you firsthand, he stepped into my life unfathomably, indescribably, but it was none other than him. And I know that he is real and that he touched me. So I hope that for somebody else. So, and until next time, continue to fight the good fight. We will see you next month, the first week of December, the first Wednesday of December, for another episode of Christ Over Fear. Thanks. Bye.